Men don't have that maternal instinct and that maternal drive that women do. And I think becoming a dad, it suddenly, I thought, wow, this is an incredible thing. And it's that also has shaped me.
David, welcome to Life Explore podcast.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the invite. I feel quite privileged to be here.
The reason we're having you on the podcast is because you have a very interesting, you have a very interesting occupation, don't you? But also, some very interesting background and stories to tell. So, without further ado, I'm going to. Do you want to sort of maybe just introduce a little bit about yourself, just a summary?
Yes. I'm David. I'm married. I've lived in the rugby area for about 22 years. I've got a 16-year-old son. I got married for the second time in 2020. I've been a qualified social worker for 27 years. I also practiced as a counsellor in the past. I've been a Christian since 2005. And part of this church since 2021.
Excellent. And that's the New Life Church where we're recording right now. Cool. So I'm gonna we basically, the format is we have a sort of a theme, people and passions. I'll ask you a few questions to get your backstory, a bit about you, and then maybe we'll then talk about sort of some of your passions. Yeah. First question, David, is you've shared with me you're quite an avid gardener, amateur gardener.
Yes.
If your life was a garden, what plants and other features would it contain, and why?
I think, well, if I could go on a desert island, if you said just take one plant with me, it would be a rose. And roses, I think have a charm that I can't see in anything else. I like the look of them. I like the fragrance of them. But with that beauty comes the thorny stems as well, which are things that one can get snagged on and pricked by as well. So I guess the beauty is what lies at the end of the thorny stem. So I haven't really thought this through properly, but I think sometimes we go through struggles and turmoil and have to encounter thorns. But at the end of this wonderful, at the end of the thorny stem is actually something quite beautiful, and that I think would encapsulate our journey with Christ as well. That you become a Christian, life isn't necessarily a bed of roses, but actually there's something really quite beautiful there, guiding us, and something quite beautiful in salvation to look forward to.
So not a garden, but a desert island rose.
Desert island rose, yes,
and actually absolutely. Continuing that theme then. So if we consider the often solitary nature of gardening, yes. How does tending to your plants help you cultivate connections and understanding with other people?
I think it is a solitary occupation, but it's when I have people visiting the house, it's a point of interest and a topic of conversation. My neighbours are keen gardeners, so we can often have a conversation about plants over the fence, and that I think has enabled me to establish a good neighbourly friendship with them. I found that actually being able to offer people gardening advice has also brought me in touch with lots of people I might not ordinarily have had a chance to talk to as well. So, along with the solitude and sometimes the quite selfish nature of gardening, there is actually a gardening community out there which does connect people.
Mm-hmm. Cool. You've also mentioned you're a gym goer. You spent quite a bit of time at the gym.
I do.
And but you don't fit the typical gym bro stereotype.
No, so, I've been I'd done a lot of weight training in the past, and then I got injured in 2013 and didn't actually go back to the gym until just after lockdown, just to sort of the end of the first lockdown in 2020. Part of it was due to the fact that I've got problems with my lower back and I need to do some rehab work, but I've actually got a tendency to be quite obsessive, and as soon as I got back into training, I obsessed about it, and actually it gave me a wonderful outlet. I felt my physical and my mental well-being were better for it, but also my back, as a result of strengthening my core, has also improved hugely as well. No, probably not a typical gym goer. Most people, I think, in most of the gyms that I've been to, have been either manual workers or doormen or competitive bodybuilders. But I've never found it a difficult place to be. In fact, I think it's been very good for me. I grew up under the guidance of a wonderful single mum, because of circumstance, and so I think I was very feminized growing up. My mother called it petticoat government that I was being subjected to. So
what was that?
Petticoat government, she called it, sort of, I see government by women. But I think, and most of the job roles I've had, most of my work colleagues, for example, are women. So to actually have an outlet with other men is actually really good. I think, especially for me, because I think as I've got older, I've never sort of considered myself to be a particularly macho man, but I think as I've got older, I've become increasingly more comfortable and confident about who I am as a person, and it's all right to be vulnerable and all right to have a soft side. And I think because of how I am, I found that one or two people in the gym have actually sort of opened up to me, which they wouldn't ordinarily do with some of the other gym goers who are probably more macho and rough and ready. So that's been a beneficial effect. But it's an environment because I've been training for a long time. I'm reasonably strong. I can get some kudos from that. It's an environment I feel very comfortable. I could probably go into any gym and not feel intimidated. And I know for some people, going into an iron den would be quite an intimidating environment.
Yeah, you sometimes go into gyms, don't you? And there's those guys who are like got the weights and they're in front of the mirror and they're just like,
yes,
you know.
I can be one of those as well, Wes. And actually sort of tried to introduce my wife to the gym, and she said she had enough of grunting men at home without having to go and see a whole throng of them in a gym. So hence she hasn't joined the gym that I go to.
So actually, in your time when you said you've gone to the gym, you've been talking to some of these guys who are probably like more sort of manual labor.
Absolutely, they are.
Is there anything from your conversations with them that sort of shifted your perspective on life or on something else in your work?
I think it makes me think that that for some people and their struggles, if if they only had Jesus in their life, that their struggles would be much easier. They would actually have a companion. Well, I'd say not much easier. I've already said the Christian life isn't always an easy one, but actually they would have a hope, and they would have and they would get so much out of having that intimate relationship, which is the cornerstone of my life. So, but I have met Christians in gyms as well. They are lurking there somewhere. Perhaps not always in plain sight, but I think my experience in gyms would be that there are a lot of people who are battling some demons, and I think for some people using the gym is actually an outlet for anger and aggression and sometimes narcissism as well.
Sure. Well, on that, okay, so I got another question for you, okay, in terms of, so if we imagine your life gets the Hollywood treatment.
Yes.
And we're talking like a high-octane action thriller. If there's an actor, an action hero to play your life, who would it be? Who would be your casting choice, and what reason would that be?
Who would I have? Be quite a difficult one, because I'm a person of contradictions. I mean, I like cerebral things, as well as actually having being in that sort of testosterone environment as well. So probably a combination of Jason Statham and Stephen Fry, probably. if that's an interesting combination. I mean, I like somebody who would be able to be comfortable in a macho environment like Jason Statham. Certainly not as macho as him, but also somebody who would be equally cerebral as well, like Stephen Fry. And I can't aspire to his intellectual powers, but a mixture of the two, perhaps. Yeah.
That would be an interesting,
interesting
character to see played.
Yes,
So I think, I can't remember if you did mention you had a son, but you've got a son.
I've got a son.
Yeah, that's right. And he's studying his A levels.
He's doing his A levels. Yes.
Biology, English. Have I got that right?
Yes.
So that's been sort of an area where you've sort of been able to connect over sports and things like that.
Yeah.
Not normally something that you would do, but if there's any, he's in college now studying. If there was any sort of subject that you could go back and as a classmate with him and study, what subject do you think that would be?
Well, I'm a big fan of history and politics, which he's not necessarily. And I've tried to sort of give him some history tuition when he was doing his history GCSE, but that wasn't of a great interest to him. Hopefully, it might be something that he might return to later. I did a politics degree years ago, so I've got an interest there. But I think probably the course that he's doing that I'd find most interesting is actually the PE course. I've been looking at PE A-level syllabuses online and trying to get myself acquainted with the course material, and I found it very insightful and really interesting. So I think that would be the one subject that I think I would have a real passion for if I was studying alongside him.
Cool. All right, and one final question, and this is going to be another sort of one of those questions. But you mentioned you work in healthcare. You're a mental health practitioner.
Yes.
So when it comes to mental health representation on TV movies, what's the kind of single most damaging or frustrating trope that you see just keeps popping up, regurgitated every time, and why does it set your teeth on edge?
That's a very good question, Wes. I don't. I know people with mental health difficulties have been featured quite a lot in soaps. I don't regularly watch watch soaps. I think one thing that perhaps was portrayed historically has been the danger that people with mental health difficulties pose to society as a whole, and I think this is one that I would want to dismiss and dismantle. I think generally people with mental health difficulties are far more at risk due to their vulnerabilities from other people than they are to the public at large. I think hopefully now more we're getting to the point where mental health difficulties can affect anybody at any time, that they don't discriminate against class, ethnicity, gender, or anything else. And hopefully we're getting better at portraying that. But I also think that, and again, I think things have changed. That it's nothing to be ashamed of. I think that the stigma that was attached to having a mental health difficulty, I'm hoping has gradually begun to fade away a little bit. So I think probably those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting because there's a lot of, I mean, not just in fictional TV, you do see the news every now and then. There's somebody, there's a horrific crime, and it's you know, it's somebody who's
absolutely
really dealing with you know, a lot of issues.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think probably most recently there was the incident in Nottingham where there were two students and an older gentleman who I think was a grandfather who was actually murdered by somebody who had mental health difficulties, who perhaps had slipped through the net a little bit in terms of I think there may have been some failings along the line that around services perhaps not monitoring in the way that they should. The difficulty there is that actually one of the key things around in working with people with mental health difficulties is risk assessment, and risk assessment isn't a precise science, and sometimes it's not always easy to fully evaluate how risky somebody is at any one time. But also I think mental health services are still the poor relation to physical health services as well, and staffing levels and pressure on services is always there. So again, it's not always easy to be able to keep a tab on absolutely everybody who needs to be monitored and give them the support that they should. And I was particularly aware of that during COVID. We teams weren't going out as regularly to see people in the community, which meant that we saw people relapsing much quicker than perhaps they ordinarily would, especially people we know something about. But also I think for a lot of people with mental health difficulties too, the isolation that lockdown brought, some of the conspiracy theories flying around also played into their paranoia too, which did make things very much more difficult.
Yeah, it was. I mean, one of the things that I noticed from the lockdown, just myself, it's like I just spent a lot more time on just scrolling social media, like doom scrolling, and then you got all the American politics starting up, and I just went down a rabbit hole with American politics, and before you know it, you know, there's you're red pilled, as they say, you know. But it's I think it can be dangerous, perhaps being, I'm trying to think how you would say it, but being by yourself, being isolated, and you know, not having people around you to kind of jolt you out into reality.
Absolutely, I think absolutely. I mean, I'm aware of somebody whose mental health is hopefully fairly stable, that I can actually be very influenced by the things that I watch on YouTube, for example. YouTube, my YouTube diet it's either junk or it's something that's quite positive. If I've had a diet of YouTube junk, then I can feel very angry, and it can set me off on completely the wrong track for the day. If I've looked at something that is uplifting, it's been an act of kindness. I mean, I was watching some clips from The Chosen today, and that put me in a good place. So I'm aware that the digest of social media content can affect people's mood and mindset enormously.
We're quite able to be influenced, aren't we, by things? And I find myself, like you say, you might be in a good mood and then you watch something in particular, and just because you've seen that, and it sets you in the wrong mood. So what? Good question would be like, what sort of things can you practice to ensure you're not sort of allowing yourself to be pulled in one direction or the other, or going down that kind of hole of being depressed? And
I think for me it's giving myself the right kind of food. It's having a time of devotion before I start the day, so that gets me off on the right footing. We talked about having breakfast earlier on, and breakfast setting us up for the day. I think spiritual food sets us up for the day as well. If I when I was regularly going into my office, it would be a 15-minute walk from home to the railway station, and that was my devotional time. And by the time I got on the train, I was in a good place, ready to start the day. I'd pray over the day. I'd pray that I would be empowered, and I'd have guidance and wisdom to make the decisions that I needed to make during the day. If for example, I actually had to rush, and with rushing, I was somewhat annoyed, or it was a crowded train. I wasn't in the right frame of mind, and it was usually those days that I found more difficult. If I've had my time with the Lord in terms of devotion and prayer, that sets me up, and then I'm less likely or less inclined to be thrown out of kilter by negative things coming at me. It's as though I've strapped my spiritual armor on. Ready to go. There's
also I can't remember what the Bible verse is, but maybe one of the guys can bring that up. But is it in Corinthians? I don't know where you should think on whatever is good, whatever is beautiful, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent, praiseworthy, think about such things. It's a really interesting kind of instruction, isn't it?
Isn't it?
We can
absolutely. And I think starting my devotion very often on my walk to the station, I would one thing that was very upmost in my mind would usually be the old hymn, "Count your blessings one by one." So that was usually quite a good start to the day. I could actually sort of think about things that I could give thanks for.
That is another thing, isn't it?
And I was able then to be in the right place, then to have that connection with God.
That's another thing, isn't it? Because quite often we can be drawn into sort of a negative feeling about a situation, or it doesn't. It may be something that's more general in the public, or something you've watched, but it could also be something in your own life that you're kind of struggling with, and you can sort of end up meditating on that. You can get quite and there's feelings of anger, feelings of injustice, like something's not fair that has happened to you. It's not fair, right? But I think there is something about counting. It's a bit of a cliche. Count your blessings, right? And it's kind of like, and it can sometimes be used to dismiss the way if you're going through something, and somebody says, "Well, just be thankful for what you got." It can be dismissive, but there is a truth in that. There's a truth in like taking stock of your life and saying, "You know what, I have a good life. Looking at what you have, I have a house.
Yes. Yeah.
I have food on the table.
Yeah.
I have, I have 2 arms and 2 legs. Which is not what everybody can say. And I'm relatively healthy. Could be healthier. But to be able to look at those things and say, you know what, actually, God, I am blessed in that I have the life I have, and I'm not, I haven't lost everything, or
I quite agree.
I don't have a health problem.
No, I quite agree. I think that as I matured, I found that one thing that was very much present in my life was contentment, being content with things, being not striving necessarily for material things. Now, some people might call contentment complacency. I dismiss that, but I think complacency is being more sort of apathetic. Contentment is you're still striving for things. There's still things that you want to achieve, but actually, your values change as well. I mean, I'm not striving to have a bigger and a better car. I'm not striving to maybe for career success. Now I'm quite happy where I am. I'm not striving to have the best of things on show. I'm more touched and pleased by simple pleasures. Spring mornings, spending time with my son, spending time with my wife, things like that, things that money can't buy.
Again, it's the old cliche, but it is true, isn't it?
It is.
I think that is a good it really is. I think that's a good key to sort of perhaps maintaining your positive balance, is to look at look at what you have and be glad for what you have, genuinely, with that, actually, well, perhaps I'm not going to change the subject, but I want to kind of pivot, because something else you shared with me, and you talked about your mother a little bit. You talked about the being governed by feminine.
Yes, absolutely, I did. Yes,
feminine sort of scenario. And you mentioned also to me earlier, a conversation we had offline, but that your parents did divorce. And I think you said your
no. My parents were my dad was a divorcee. My mum and dad got married quite late, but then my dad died when I was 12.
Sorry, so let me get that right. So he was a divorcee. So he married your mother, but he died when you were 12.
When I was 12. Yes, that's right.
So that obviously had a huge impact.
I think so. I mean, my dad was somebody who was working about 60 hours a week, and he worked on a Saturday as well. So. I think he was a great DIYer. So Sundays were very often spent with doing things around the house. We had an old property. It was a 17th century cottage which he lavished love on, which I can understand as a homeowner now, who appreciates sort of period properties and wanting to restore them. I think also because his first marriage had been so difficult, he just wanted to spend time with my mum, and I think very often they were almost a little bit like an island, and I was yes, I was welcome on the island, but they always wanted to spend a lot of time together as well, because time was quite limited. I think when people say, do you miss your dad? I didn't spend a huge amount of time with him because I didn't really get a chance to know him. So it's not missing who he was, it's missing what I didn't have. I think later, and I think having a male role model in my teens would have been hugely beneficial. And there are so many life skills that my dad could have taught me that I didn't get a chance to actually learn. And I think that I find quite difficult, but there are some traits in from my dad that I can see in myself. My dad, although my dad wasn't, and I've done much better academically than my dad, but my dad was a what you call an autodidactic, so somebody who took on self-learning, and he would go to libraries and he would get books out on subjects he wanted to know. If he was still alive now, he'd be amazed by YouTube. But he equally, if he wanted to learn something, I remember him wanting to learn how to plaster a wall, for example. He would go to a building site and ask to watch somebody plaster, and that's also how he would learn. That sort of self-directed learning, I think, has been passed down to me, and I've done all sorts of self-directed learning. I remember getting a cricket coaching manual, teaching myself how to swing bowl, spin bowl, bat. Spent hours in the summer on my own in the garden doing that. Typical only child type of thing to do.
I actually have something in common there as well, because I grew up without my father figure, and my mother remarried but then divorced again, so I spent the majority of my life just raised by my mother, so I have a similar experience there. Again, the loss of it, well, not the loss, it's not a loss, it's just what you've missed out on, and I'm sure there's probably lots of there's I think in society right now there's a lot of men who don't have a father figure.
Absolutely.
Like what's your kind of, what would you say to them, or what would you how have you managed to become the man you are today? You've obviously learned to shave and all that kind of stuff. I know.
I think by trial and error, perhaps some of it. But I think the great shaping things in my life, certainly having a faith, because actually knowing who I am in Christ makes me, if I'm acceptable to God, come as you are, and I think, hopefully, I am becoming who God destined me to be, and I feel as though that sort of shaping and knocking off some of the rough edges has happened. I think the other key influence is actually being a dad, and I think a lot of men, people say, aren't you desperate to be a father? And I never thought, oh gosh, I must be a dad. But I think for a lot of men, it's not until you actually become a parent that you actually realise just what a wonderful experience it is. Men don't have that maternal instinct and that maternal drive that women do. And I think becoming a dad, it suddenly, I thought, wow, this is an incredible thing, and it's that also has shaped me. Thinking back to my son's early life, they go through various stages, the crawling, the teething, the walking, and then the why question. Why? And I found myself, if my son asked me a question, if I couldn't explain it to him about things that I believed in, if I couldn't explain it to him in terms that he could understand, or if I questioned myself on it, then I thought, why on earth do I actually hold those views? So that was also a very interesting and shaping experience, actually changing my viewpoint on the world. I think also becoming a parent and a dad makes you a lot less selfish as a person. You can't afford to be selfish any longer. Or if you do remain selfish, then your relationship with your child is really not on the right footing, and I think it suffers as a result of that. And I found that actually the connection with my son is wonderful. I know, although I'm now co-parenting from a distance because he's in London. We chat on the phone a lot. He comes and stays. He's great company, and we've been able to connect through sport, especially. Hopefully, I'm not embarrassing him terribly because I'm still reasonably able to play tennis. I'm still reasonably okay at kicking a ball. I can take him to the gym. There are things that we can do where we can actually get pleasure from doing together as an activity. Aside from that, Wes, I think perhaps the third thing that made me or began to make me who I am was actually going to university. I went to university for the first time at 22, which was 4 years after most people. And I found that I'd had a fairly torrid time at school, was pretty immature. I didn't realise the importance of studying, really. And then I got a second chance and then was able to go to university at 22. And for the first time in my life, I actually felt as though I fitted in. I'd felt something of a terrible misfit before that. But actually creating friendships, feeling, again, that was the start of feeling a little bit more confident about who I was as a person. Actually getting some kudos for some of the things I was able to do, again, began to shape me. And I think at that point, one of the things that I found was, being a couple of years older than most people, I was the sort of the one that they sort of looked up to, and looked. Some of my sort of peers were looking for me for guidance and support and emotional support, and that was a role that I gladly took on, and that did shape me as well. Certainly in terms of then careers after that, I felt that actually my skill set was suited to actually helping people, really.
I think you're also quite a calm person and approachable, and there seems to be something of a, I can certainly think back to my university days. I had become a Christian maybe a few years before I went to university. I was still very much, I was redeemed, and I was there's certainly Christ had started to work in me, but I was still very much a basket case. And I think I was quite prickly, or not prickly. I always felt myself as being very open with people and warm and embracing of people. But I think sometimes just my approach tends to put people off. Perhaps and sometimes it does now still. But I think you probably have I think looking at you, my assessment is you have much more a sort of a calm. You're a very calm person. You're very calm to talk to, and I think that,
I hope so, Wes. I think sometimes in moments of solitude, I'm not necessarily particularly calm, but I think my public face, yes, generally, I think most people would say that is. That's me, and it's not something I have to force. It's who I am. I think maybe it's been honed, having worked in a counselling environment, but also working in crisis situations, like the Kipling poem, "If you can keep your head when all those about you are losing theirs." Then that's a good thing. Sort of part and parcel of I think of who I am.
It's a good poem for men as well.
It is. Yes.
I think it's I think if I remember reading that poem when I was younger, and I felt there was something that it spoke to me. As being a man who didn't have a father figure around, somebody to sort of guide you through life and give you these kind of pearls of wisdom. I imagine you as well would go to books or
I would.
places to find that wisdom.
Absolutely, Wes.
And
I would, yeah.
those were sort of like, they would give you this kind of, there's a refreshment about it. There was something, I think, that came through from it, and you're like, that's a great mantra to have.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
It is.
Actually, I had a question, because one author that I really attached to was C.S. Lewis.
Yes, yeah.
I wonder, do you have an author at all, or an artist that you particularly attached to as a mentor, because, in the absence of the father figure?
I can't necessarily think of one. No, one or two people, briefly. I think one man comes to mind when I became a Christian. It's amazing how God sets these things up in His infinite wisdom. But I remember going to a church in Birmingham, and I was working in Birmingham at the time, living here in Rugby, and one chap who was there, who prayed for me, was a guy called Cyril Regis, who'd been somebody I'd watched as a Coventry City fan from the terraces. He'd played for West Brom, Coventry, Aston Villa, Wolves, and was a hero, and usually for footballers, he had universal acclaim, even though he played for rival teams. I mean, Villa and Coventry have some rivalry, but Wolves and West Brom have great rivalry and almost hatred for one another as well. But yet he was revered by both sets of supporters. So he was this incredible man who'd become a Christian, who prayed with me, and then we kept in touch. And he had an untimely death in 2018, and we'd message each other from time to time after that. But actually, in many ways, as a new Christian, having somebody like that who was so revered and so cool, that made being a Christian cool, and that was a really good and a very positive role model to have. And on a couple of occasions, he'd pick me up from work, and we'd go out for lunch, and that was an incredible experience, actually, having somebody like that who was actually sort of taking an interest in me and guiding me as well. Yeah. But aside from that, I don't think so. Most of my strong relationships, I think, were with women rather than men, and I think even now, although I've alluded to the fact that I can go to the gym and quite happily talk to people, I'm perhaps at my best talking to women. I think I can relate better to women probably than I can to men still, and much of my early upbringing, my mum had people who were her female friends were there, and obviously quite influential on me as well. I always sort of joke that I couldn't change the tire on a car, but I could probably choose soft furnishings and curtain material. So I think I do relate to that. Yes. I think I used to get on very well and relate to women, but not so much to men. Especially the more masculine sort of thing. Yes, of course.
I remember early on my Christian walk. There was a older lady in the church. Sort of kind of adopted me spiritually, and go around the house and make me tea and some biscuits, and then talk, just talk and talk and talk, and she would mentor me. And it was kind of what I needed at a time, and it was probably it was the kind of person I would respond to. I think as I've gotten older and the age I am now, I have a lot better relationships with men, and
I most certainly do.
I think that just is the nature of.
I think it is. Yeah. I think so. And it was just guess how we've been brought up, and our influences. My mum tried to do her very best, but there were lots of things obviously that she couldn't. She couldn't teach me or
if anything, I think when women try to replace the father figure,
Yes,
it's not a good idea. I think
it's not necessarily a good thing. It's not.
Yeah.
No. And I think I was watching something today that was talking about the absence of male single mothers and the absence of men in the home, leading to crime. I think there's something in it, but I also think that in many instances, if you've got a dad at home who's not a particularly good role model and who's not a particularly good dad, then sometimes you might be just better off with your mum, and then you might find a positive role model in an uncle or somebody in the community or somebody who can mentor you. I don't. I think it depends on the quality of the of the parenting and the fathering, really, perhaps more than.
But there's another thing, isn't there? I think, and I think, and it's probably a challenge to us as men. In the church, there's when I joined the church, I found it difficult to relate to a lot of men, but I found they didn't sort of relate to me either. I mean, I remember, this is bringing up old wounds, but I remember somebody, an older man, once saying to me, like, your problem is, you don't have a, like a spiritual father, you need to, and what he said to me, he said, you need to find yourself a spiritual father. And it kind of, I gotta say, wounded me.
Yes. Yeah.
And you know why it wounded me was because it was like my fault. I hadn't found a spiritual father. And then suddenly I was with there's this task. I've got to find a spiritual father. But all the men I knew in the church at the time, most of them already had children.
Yes.
And it's like, what do? You go up to these guys and you just go, hey, look, adopt me. I need. And I felt.
What do you do?
Yeah. And it took me a long while to kind of get over that and realize, hey, that was not my job. That was your job.
It's a rather odd thing that he said. It sort of reminds me a little bit, perhaps, of Mr. Miyagi in Karate Kid, sort of trying to find somebody who'll sort of take you under their wing. I think as a single man in the church, it's also quite difficult because most churches women predominate anyway, don't they?
Yes, and more social. They're more likely to approach.
You have married couples, and then you have quite a lot of single men perhaps in the church, not quite so common. But also I think. Actually, and I've become, I think, somewhat naively, I used to sort of start conversations with anybody in church, men or women, but I was particularly. It wasn't until somebody said, "So just be careful about." How you approach perhaps single women in the church
of course,
as well,
you can,
and how that might be perceived.
Well, I think it's tough, isn't it? I think if you're a single man in the church, of course, you're going to want to. I think it's healthy to try and approach some single women, but at the same time, well, especially if you're a married man, but you've got to you've got to be a bit smart,
you have, yes, I think by my nature I will sort of talk to anybody, and if anybody appears to be in need, I'll go out of my way to help them without me necessarily thinking the consequences of how that might be perceived.
I feel the same way, and again, because you have that innate ability to talk to women much easier and relate to them, you just got to be careful about that you're not forming a bond, I say, outside of
course,
just being a friend or helping out or whatever it is you'd be. You mentioned your mother, and you did say to me, another conversation we had is she had quite a lot of influence on you, and she did influence you to go into your role in care as well.
Huge influence, Wes.
So what would you say? What qualities, or what would you say that led you in that direction with your mother? And what would you say? Actually, is there a piece of advice she sort of gave you that sort of stuck with you?
Lots of advice, I think. But I think my mum was socially very conservative, but her whole ethos, she trained as a physiotherapist. My grandmother had been a physiotherapist as well. Her great aunt was a physiotherapist. Her sister-in-law was a physiotherapist, and my maternal grandmother had qualified as a physiotherapist in about 1919, when women didn't really have a career at all, and that influenced my mum. But I think the thing that went through my mum's whole practice as a physio was actually serving people. If she hated the what came in the late 80s and early 90s was a top heavy managerial ethos within the health service. If somebody was in trouble, my mum would stay behind and treat them there and then. So sorts of things she'd do. If somebody had an acute neck injury and they needed manipulating to get out of pain, my mum would say, "There's no point them coming in for an assessment and then seeing them next week. They need to be treated here and now." And she found that the new approach to treating people was really against the grain for her, and she decided to jettison the NHS at the age of 60. But I think just helping people in need, actually going out of your way to actually serve people, really. Although she wasn't a Christian, serving people and actually helping people and actually doing your best by other people, being kind and respectful. Those were key values that I think were passed on. And I think that probably did influence my career choices. And I think those values were sort of fairly innate in me. And I found that when I've tried to sort of deviate away from that, and I've gone off to other careers, I think God's clearly had me on a path where He wants me to be serving people in a professional capacity. And I've found that whenever I've tried to veer off and say, I don't want to do this anymore, I want to go and earn money, or I want to go and do something that has a bit more sort of kudos or status, that then my wings have always been clipped. I remember going to London to have an interview for media sales, where you could make a lot of money, and at the end of the interview, the guy said, "Can I just say you're the most unsuitable candidate I've ever had the misfortune of interviewing?" But he said, most people I interview are really quite unpleasant. They're very driven individuals, but they don't have what you've got. He said, "Go away and focus on what you're good at. This isn't for you." And I phoned him up afterwards and thanked him very much. And he said, "Just your CV was okay. It read well. You're well qualified, but you're not qualified for sales. You're not a testosterone animal who would succeed in a sales environment."
I think that's a compliment.
It is. He said this is the greatest compliment, really. He said, in terms of decent people, I mean, I don't see many people like you. So go back and I've had one or two things like that where I've tried to deviate from the path, and then something's happened and I've been pruned back and had to
interesting choice of words.
Yes, and then sort of followed the course I'm supposed to be on. Yeah.
And actually, is there a so you spoke about your mother because she was a nurse, physiotherapist. Yes. So obviously her influencing you to go into sort of care, but care sort of occupation. But where was the decision to go with sort of mental health versus physical?
It came a bit later, and it came quite by chance. I'd been a social worker for quite a long time. I was working I'd had two or three specialities. I'd worked in addiction service, I'd worked in learning disability services, and then I was then sort of moved sideways into a mental health team, and suddenly I had to start learning about policies and procedures and mental health law and how to manage in a crisis. And I had some very, very good people around me who I absorbed knowledge from like a sponge, and they really did help me hugely. Without 2 or 3 people were absolutely incredible. Without them, I wouldn't have been able to have progressed. And I can even now still hear their voice in the back of my head when I'm sort of mulling over a decision, and I think, what would they have done? And then it comes back to me. So mental health was thrust upon me. It wasn't something that I actively sought. So I then sort of, I'm now, 12 years in, and I've now got a lot of newly qualified social workers who are coming into mental health work for the first time, and so I'm now hopefully able to impart my knowledge and my way of approaching things onto them. So that's one thing I'm quite excited about, actually helping develop new workers, and help to develop a passion in them.
Okay. And I guess that leads us to sort of the final topic that we were going to broach. And I think bringing that in, we talked a little bit about the male sort of just being a male, what it is, and growing up without a male influence, and obviously, with your occupation, with mental health, with all of that. There's obviously, just as it so happens in the media recently, there's been this widely publicized and controversial TV show that I'm sure people have heard of, and if not, and if you're listening to this in the future sometime and it's all blown over, it's the TV show called Adolescence. Features a young man who has committed a crime, a crime against a young girl, and there's a lot of controversy because they call out Andrew Tate in the show, and I had not heard of this term until a few weeks ago, which was the manosphere. Which is apparently this kind of online. I mean, I know that there's sort of that online social movement,
incels,
incel stuff and all of that. But like, it's to me, perhaps I'm the one who's out of touch, but for me, this TV show seems to be blowing it over and making it a much bigger deal than it is. But be interesting to get your take on it, and what you think of the manosphere and the, you could give your review of the TV show if you like. I don't know.
Well, I have to admit, I haven't actually watched the TV show, but
okay.
I think for me, having, I still think that men are still a bit confused about what's expected of them by society, by women, and perhaps even from themselves as well. I think back to I think when we were chatting yesterday, I know we touched on this thing. I remember in the 1980s we had this idea of the new man, this ultra sensitive guy who would sort of babysit, nurture children, be almost a stay-at-home dad, and he was seen as being quite progressive, and then there was a backlash against him saying, but he's not a proper man, and then you had to move completely away from that. Then with the lad culture and even ladettes, which was men allowing boys will be boys. There were the emergence of the lad mags, etc. And then I remember sort of maybe 10 years ago, this idea of toxic masculinity as well. So men seem to be very confused about who they are and what they're supposed to be. I think that being comfortable with who you are as a man, I think takes time. I think it is something that is hopefully that there are safer spaces where men can be comfortable with who they are. They can actually talk about issues that they're going through, and I think that's been more accepted now that men have voices, and men around mental health issues, etc. I'm pleased to see that there are issues that are now being promoted. I mean, a long time ago, in terms of women's health, you had breast cancer awareness and cervical cancer awareness. I think now with men, it's prostate cancer awareness, for example. Again, I think it's really good that that's being promoted, because men have been traditionally very poor about seeking advice on their own. They don't want to go to the doctors. No, that's probably a rather sort of convoluted way of going about answering the question. So I think there's still some confusion. I don't think people like Andrew Tate are a good role model at all. I think the answer as a Christian, I would say, is that it's who you are in Christ. And I think when you discover who you are in Christ, I think that is the thing that gives you the most empowerment. And I always remember seeing these wristbands, www, what would Jesus do? And I think sometimes having that in the back of my mind as well, is as him being the ultimate male role model, having a think about what he might do in particular situations. My wife often says to me, "So you're watching this now. If Jesus was a dinner party guest, would this be suitable to be watching with him?" And that, sometimes that acts as my filter as well.
Yeah. I think that's a good point, actually, is that, perhaps really, rather than trying to shape your masculinity around the manosphere or whatever that might be, but to try and shape your masculinity around Jesus.
Absolutely, yes.
He was a man, and he wasn't a pushover. I mean, there's a lot of
absolutely not. No, I think I remember there's a song, "Gentle Jesus, Meek and Mild." Well, I think it's a huge misinterpretation of Jesus. I think he was, on the one hand, the most empathic, compassionate of men, but he wasn't as meek as a lamb. And I think there was another side to the coin, and I think he was assertive. I think he was somebody who was certainly never a pushover, who would but he was always, and he got cross. He was righteously angry.
Well, so, the example always is turning over the tables
in the temple. Absolutely. But he was there as the ultimate model for us to aspire to. We can never get there, but so I think that having that as an idea it helps me enormously, actually.
What would you say for I guess Christian men who are consuming this content online, maybe not like the extremes, pick up culture, Andrew Tate stuff, but what there's a fine line, isn't there? There's some good stuff, I think, out there.
There is some good stuff.
I think, and he's controversial. Some people don't like, but Jordan Peterson, I think, a lot of the stuff he had to say was very good and helpful and instrumental.
I think so. I mean, I think I've watched quite a bit of Jordan Peterson. I sometimes think he's working on such a high intellectual plane. It's sometimes quite difficult to follow his train of thought. Always, he's a formidable debater, but I think he's working at such a high intellectual level. People just don't really stand a chance. It's like be like going into a boxing match with Mike Tyson,
But
really,
he-
as an untrained.
Yeah, but even he's
Fighter.
had some
He has. Oh gosh,
some
he has.
slips,
Yeah.
hasn't he?
He has absolutely. Yeah, he has.
And I guess that's the question, right? You know, if you're consuming this content, you know, what's kind of like, as a Christian man, I mean, how should you engage with that content, and you know, how should you guard yourself, I suppose, against going too far
Absolutely
into that rabbit hole?
Oh, yeah. I think it's absolutely fine to watch things for pure enjoyment, but I think I'm sort of thinking of one's motive for watching things should be considered. I suppose one might say, is this spiritually uplifting? What am I benefiting from this? It is what impact is this having on my outlook? Is there anything here which contradicts what I believe as well? And perhaps using that as a filter.
I mean, for me, it's I think you have to. There's another verse where Paul says, you know, you should test everything, and I think I think in terms of the ideas you come across with online, where you've got, let's say, very conservative people who are speaking, who are quite, you know, as a Christian, we do align with some of the conservative talking points. Not all of them, but there's certain elements of that come up. So it's quite easy to fall into that trap of just going along with what these conservative talkers have to say. But at the same time, I think I often find myself thinking, actually, that is not that's not how a Christian would speak, or how a Christian would think about certain things, you know. And it seems to be very led by politics as well, you know.
It can be, and I think the US have a division between liberals and Christians, and liberals and conservatives.
Yes, yeah.
And what the liberals do is that they use perhaps Christianity and emphasize the support for the poor and the disadvantaged, etc. And what the conservative right would do would be to have a look at sort of Christian morality, and that is how they use Christianity, and so both are trying to use perhaps less so on the liberal on the liberal side now, but because I think with wokeism that's kind of eroded some elements of the impact of Christianity on more liberal thinking, but I think US politics and British politics as well different aspects of Christianity are used on different sides of the political divide.
Yeah, that, you know, it is interesting to, you know, if we divert, because I know also you did your degree in politics, so this is probably a topic we have to be careful as we go into this, because we can always, like I say, we can go a bit too far. But thinking about the American politics in particular, you know, there's such a divide now, and I think it spills over into this country, definitely.
It does.
But there's a divide now, as you say, between liberals and conservatives. But there's also like the MAGA, you know, the MAGA cult. And they seem to be not quite conservative as well. They seem to be a bit something else, you know.
Yeah, I would say that they are more what one might call populist. So and a populist approach, I think, is one that appeals not only to perhaps conservative-minded professionals, but also it's picking up people who are feel disadvantaged and let down by conventional politics. I think if you look at the UK, for example, where reform have done very well, have been to look at people who don't feel represented by the Labour Party, who would have been their traditional that would have been their traditional hunting ground, really, and they feel that reform is much more representation of them, and I think they have a populist approach which appeals outside of the typical two-party framework.
Yeah, they do seem to be gathering some steam. I don't know whether they have enough support to swing the election, but
I don't. I think given the way the two-party system is set up in this country, Wes, I don't think so. I don't think they can get much traction within that. The only way that reform would get better representation in Parliament would be if there was a change in electoral system, which would then encourage other parties. It would also benefit the Liberal Democrats and the Greens as well.
So what do you make of, I mean, we can go, staying on the topic of this adolescence and so on. I mean, like, what do you make of the Keir Starmer's decision to, all schools have got to watch this documentary now?
I don't think it should be required watching. I feel there's an element of doctrination, and I would question what's the benefit of it, really. Is there any sort of sound educational basis for watching this? I would much rather schools concentrated on academic subjects rather than actually having to have this imposed upon them.
I think my concern is when I heard this, it was going to be sort of, look at it when all schools, every kid has got to watch this. I thought there's going to be lots of 12 and 13-year-old boys in particular who've never heard of Andrew Tate. They've never heard of this.
And it's going to arouse curiosity, and then they'll start looking.
What happens when your teacher tells you, don't do this?
You do quite the opposite, don't you, Wes?
Don't go online, and don't browse this stuff. What's going to happen? They're going to go online and browse it. I wouldn't be surprised if suddenly, he gets a lot more popularity because it's anti-establishment, and that's
in many ways it's a great advert for them, isn't it?
Yeah. It's interesting. It's interesting. I think that's. I think it's been a good conversation.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
So far. Very much enjoyed talking to you, having you on, and
enjoyed it too.
It'd be good to have you back again, and to discuss some of this more, But I've got one final question for you, okay? And this is what I traditionally now am ask every guest, which is 100 years from now, what is the one thing that the generations of tomorrow can take away from the church of today?
I think what they might think about the established church in this country is the fact that they've tried to be all things to all men, and I think that they've like a reed in the wind. They bent according to popular opinion. I think they might say the established church in this country hasn't really stood up or promoted Christianity in the way that it should have done. When I hear the outgoing Archbishop saying, the term church isn't inclusive, it just makes me wonder. So when Christ comes back to, the church as his bride, what's he going to come and claim back? The something of England, or the goodness knows what he'll be coming to claim back if church isn't inclusive. But I hope that actually the churches outside of the main established church, I see the church here growing in numbers. I see that actually we are as a body of believers becoming increasingly more diverse, which I think is great. I think diversity in the church is a reflection of the society out there, and I think the more diversity that we have in the church, the better. I think here we're now probably almost sort of 50-50 percent black, 50% white, and I think that's added something to the worship. Here, I'd like to think that outside of the established church, that actually they would look and think, despite all the negativity about Christianity in the mainstream media, how it's trying to be marginalised, we've actually remained resolute and strong, and have refused to cave into it.
Excellent. Well, thank you, David.
Thank you very much indeed, Wes. That's really, really good.
And that concludes.
Thank you.
We hope you've enjoyed watching or listening to this episode. If you have any thoughts about the topics from this episode, feel free to leave a comment or reach out to the team. Don't forget to follow, like, and subscribe wherever you're joining us from so you won't miss the next episode. We appreciate you listening in and look forward to bringing you more content through Life Explored. Bye for now.